Joining us now, Project 21 National Advisory Board member and principal at Red Tail Strategies, Christopher Arps, back with us, and political analyst and best-selling author Mark Halperin. Great to have you back on. Chris, Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, one of the bluest cities in the country, had an article yesterday basically saying that John Fetterman is hurting himself with the voters of Pennsylvania by not releasing these medical records. At some point, is he just going to be forced to do this? I remember Donald Trump eventually bowed to the pressure and took a cognitive exam, which he passed with flying colors. Joe Biden won't do it, but I'm noticing a trend here with Democrats.
I don't think Fetterman is going to release his medical records, and quite frankly, I don't think Fetterman is going to debate next week. We saw that NBC interview where he is taking time to be able to answer these questions. He has to read the question on his screen. There is no way he can do a 60-minute debate with his medical condition right now. I think that's the real intrigue for me, is how are they going to get him out of this debate next week?
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think, Mark, before I would have said he's going to do this debate, but maybe after that NBC interview, maybe he's deciding, forget it, I'm ahead. Going to what Senator Santorum said, though, he said, look, Fetterman's raised a ton of money, and we hear this in lots of states. Democrats are able to fundraise and get so much money. Why aren't Republicans able to get as much money than Democrats are, especially here in Pennsylvania?
It's a real mystery, Allison. It's not just Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and in Florida. Even the incumbent Republicans are not raising as much. And a lot of it's online. It's one of the mysteries. I think it's one of the biggest undercover stories in politics now. It happened last cycle, too. You recall the guy who ran against Lindsey Graham in South Carolina raised like $100 million. Again, most of it online and small dollar donations. And I think it's put the Republican Party at a big disadvantage. And it's allowed some of these Democrats like John Fetterman to continue to fuel an effort to win a seat in an easier way. When you raise money online, you don't have to go to a fundraiser. You don't have to buy your donors a steak. You just check the internet and see what you've raised. So until the Republican Party figures out why this is happening and corrects it, that's going to be one pretty big disadvantage they deal with.
Go ahead,
Allison,
Chris.
What I've heard with a lot of the trouble Republicans are having to raise money is former President Trump is doing a tremendous amount of fundraising through online and text, and that has taken a lot of the air out of the sails of the fundraising. But there was a report yesterday of Leader McCarthy for the Republicans. He has set a record with his PAC. National Leadership Fund, I think that's what it called this last quarter. He raised $73 million. So his PAC is doing quite well.
Yeah, but most of that, Chris, as you know, is not from the internet or from social media. Most of that is from major donors, and that's a Republican advantage. But if you can raise money one of the two ways, better to raise it on social media and the web. It's just so much faster and easier and cheaper.
So really fascinating conversation. So Mark, you're talking about the digital fundraising, which is becoming a bigger and bigger deal. And mark my words, pun intended there, 27 days from now, so the day after the midterms, if Democrats do better than we all think they will, this will become a huge part of the story.
Totally.
The importance of digital fundraising. Something else that I saw that kind of dovetails off this is the Obama effect. Chris, Barack Obama played a huge role in 2020. He played a big role in the midterms in 2018. Basically, he doesn't want to go out on the campaign trail now because what it does to the GOP base, not the MAGA base, but it fires up the GOP base. So that's why we're not seeing Barack Obama out there, stumping for John Fetterman.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, Barack Obama reminds us of Joe Biden's presidency. We have very high fuel prices right now. And if people remember during the 2016 campaign, President Obama, the candidate Obama at that time, said that we want gas prices to rise so we can shift to a green economy. And he told coal companies that if you plan to build a coal company in the United States, plant, we're going to bankrupt you. So I think it just him on the campaign trail just reminds voters that Biden is just a continuation of his presidency.
Yeah, great conversation. Mark, go ahead. This is Mercedes Schlapp's coming on in a minute, Mark, to talk about. Politico had this article yesterday about Miriam Adelson, I think is her name, one of the biggest donors in GOP politics. She just announced that she's going to stay neutral in 2024. She's not all for Trump just yet, which is a huge kink in the GOP's fundraising, by the way.
Yeah. on President Obama, I think what you guys said is true, but I also think he'd rather do his own thing. And I think he might be using this as a bit of an excuse because he's not super into politics. He'd rather not be out there, campaigning on planes the way he'd have to do. On the Republican donor community, you cited one, but there are lots of the biggest Republican donors who aren't super excited at all about Donald Trump running, would rather he not be the nominee. And it's going to be fascinating to see how many of them stay neutral, as she says she's going to do, and how many of them sign up with potentially other candidates, which, of course, they'll notice in Mar-a-Lago, anyone who signs up with somebody besides Donald Trump, even anybody who remains neutral, is going to be on a certain list.
Well, I think speculation is that she's going to throw her support behind Ron DeSantis. Here's Charlie Crist. Remember Charlie Crist, by the way? Boy, we heard a lot about him after the Florida primary. Hurricane Ian hit. It's been the Ron DeSantis show, understandably. But here's Charlie Crist on why Ron DeSantis did not handle Hurricane Ian well.
Why this governor wasn't motivated for the health, safety, and welfare of the people of Lee County more than he was is unconscionable. It's inexplicable, as I said before. Not only that, but, during Friday before the storm hit, he went to a football game, was AWOL for almost 20 hours. No more reporting on what was happening to the hurricane as it was getting closer and closer to Florida. Another gap in leadership, if you will. And that kind of lack of leadership is exactly what Florida doesn't need.
Chris, final thought. Have you ever seen a more clear example of a candidate grasping at straws there?
Very grasping for straws, because if DeSantis was doing as bad as Chris is saying, it would lead the nightly news every single day for days.
Good point, Chris. That story's kind of gone away, the Hurricane Ian. We wish everybody down in Florida the best, by the way. The recovery there is going to take a long time. Okay, really enjoyed the conversation this morning. Christopher Arps, Mark Halperin, we'll do it again soon. Thank you.